Have you ever wondered if the language you speak actually shapes the thoughts you can have? I mean, really shapes them. It's a huge question that gets right to the core of who we are, and today we are going to unpack it.
So let's just put it right out there. Does your language control what you're able to think? It sounds kind of simple, but this question has kept thinkers up at night for centuries. Because if the answer is yes, even a little bit, it could mean that billions of people are walking around experiencing reality in fundamentally different ways, all because of their vocabulary and grammar.
And this is not a new debate. Not at all. Philosophers, psychologists, they've been wrestling with this one for ages. You can see why it's so tricky, right? For most of us, thought feels like a little voice in our head. We're literally talking to ourselves all day long. So how in the world do you even begin to pull those two things apart?
Now, there are a bunch of different theories about how all this works. But there's one idea that has always been the most radical and, honestly, the most fascinating. It's the idea that the language we learn doesn't just express our thoughts. It actually creates the space for them.
And this is the main event right here, the language relativist hypothesis. You also hear it called the Whorfian hypothesis. The big idea is that your language is like a lens that you view the entire world through. But as we're about to see, the real debate is, what kind of lens is it?
Because this one idea quickly split into two different camps, and that kicked off a huge scientific debate. On one side, you've got the strong version of the hypothesis, and on the other, you've got the weak version. And figuring out the difference between these two is really the key to the whole puzzle.
So here's the showdown. The strong version says language is a prison. It argues that if your language doesn't have a word for a concept, you literally cannot have that thought. It's impossible. The weak version, though, is way more subtle. It sees language as a guide. It doesn't trap you, but it carves out these comfortable, well-worn paths in your mind, making some thoughts just feel easier and more natural than others.
All right, so let's tackle that strong version first, the whole language as a prison idea. It's super dramatic, right? The suggestion that our thoughts are completely boxed in by the vocabulary and grammar that we happen to grow up with. But this radical idea ran headfirst into a massive problem. Researchers started poking at it, and they found a huge logical flaw right at its core. Turns out, it was all based on a circular argument. Okay, stick with me here. This is the crucial point. Whorf argued that because languages are so different, people's thoughts must be different. Make sense so far? But when he was asked for proof, okay, show us these different thoughts, his only evidence was the different languages themselves. He was basically saying, I know their thinking is different because their language is different. See the loop? It's a classic catch-22.
And yeah, because of that fundamental flaw, very few studies have ever been able to back up this strong version. Today, most researchers are in agreement. The idea of language as a rigid prison for the mind, it just doesn't seem plausible. So if language isn't a prison, then what is it? Well, this brings us to the weak version of the hypothesis. And this version paints a picture that is way more nuanced and, as it turns out, probably more powerful.
So instead of a prison, the weak version says our language is like a network of well-worn paths through a forest. It doesn't stop you from going off trail and exploring, but it sure makes following the path a whole lot easier and more efficient. It's all about cognitive cost. Some thoughts are just less work to have in certain languages.
Now, this all sounds pretty convincing in theory, but is there any real-world proof? Oh yeah, let's dive into a fantastic study that really brings this whole idea to life.
We're going to look at a really cool study from 2001 by Lera Boroditsky. She compared how Mandarin speakers and English speakers think about something that is incredibly abstract, the concept of time itself. Okay, so check out this core difference. In English, we almost exclusively talk about time horizontally. We look forward to a brighter future, we put the past behind us, it's all on a flat line. But in Mandarin, it's very common to use vertical metaphors. The phrase for next week can literally be down week, and last week can be up week. So, you see the million-dollar question taking shape, right? If you talk about time as if it's moving up and down instead of forward and back, does that actually change the way your brain organizes it? And the answer, from a series of really clever experiments, was a clear and resounding yes. The way people talked about time was directly mirrored in how they thought about it. The linguistic habit had become a cognitive habit. It's wild.
In her own words, the study's conclusion was that language is a powerful tool in shaping thought, especially when it comes to these big, abstract ideas like time. So, it's not a prison, it's a tool, a powerful one that helps carve out our mental landscape.
So the two big takeaways here are,
First, that our native language is super important in shaping our habitual thought, our mental default settings, you could say. And second, that it becomes an especially powerful tool when our brains are trying to get a handle on abstract concepts that you can't, physically touch or see.
Okay, so we've busted the prison myth and we've explored the idea of language as a guide. But what does all of this actually mean for you, sitting there thinking in your native language right now?
Here's the bottom line. The language you speak is not a cage. It doesn't put a hard ceiling on what you're capable of thinking, but it absolutely does create these grooves, these tendencies, these habits in your mind. It powerfully shapes the thoughts that come to you most naturally, most easily, most often.
And that's really the final thought I want to leave you with. Take a second to think about your own language. What ideas does it make easy for you? What mental paths does it gently guide you down every single day without you even noticing? The answer might just reveal a whole lot more than you'd expect.
Have you ever just stopped and thought about the connection between what's going on in your head and the words that actually come out of your mouth? It's one of those huge questions we don't really think about, like which one is the engine and which one is the train car? Do our thoughts create the words we use, or do the words we learn actually build the thoughts we're able to have?
So yeah, that's the big puzzle we're diving into today. What comes first, the thought or the word? This has been a massive debate in psychology for, well, forever. And trust me, the answer is way more interesting than you might think. So let's jump in and explore the two major sides of this whole thing.
All right, first up, we've got a giant in the field, the legendary Jean Piaget. Now, his idea was really straightforward, and honestly, it just kind of makes sense on the surface. He was convinced that thought has to come first. It's the bedrock, the foundation that our language gets built on top of.
You see, for Piaget, everything was about developmental stages. He believed a child's mind isn't just a shrunken version of an adult's. Nope. It builds itself up, piece by piece, step by step. A child is born with some basic mental tools, and as they grow, they pick up new skills, like object permanence. The reason peekaboo is so hilarious to babies is they literally think you vanished. Piaget argued that only after the brain builds these concepts can language really start to happen. And here's a perfect example of what he meant. A little kid might hear you say the word smaller, and they can parrot it right back. But are they really using it? According to Piaget, no way. Not until their brain can actually wrap itself around the concept of relative size. The understanding has to be there first for the word to have any real power.
Piaget even had a name for this kind of mimicry. He called it egocentric speech. It's basically when a kid is just talking to themselves, playing with the sounds and repeating words without really trying to communicate with anyone. For Piaget, real language is social. It has a purpose. This other stuff, he said, that's just practice. It's not the real deal.
So to boil Piaget's whole idea down, it's this. Your thoughts create a box, and your language has to live inside that box. You simply can't talk about things you can't think about. It's clean, it's logical, and for a very long time, pretty much everybody agreed with him. So that settles it, right? Story's over. Well, not so fast. Because what happens when you find real-world cases that just refuse to fit inside that neat little box? I mean, what happens when we find examples where language seems to be doing just fine? In fact, it's flourishing, without that strong cognitive foundation Piaget said was so essential.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. Take a look at these examples. On one side, you've got a case study of a woman named Laura. Her measured IQ was incredibly low, around 41, and she struggled with most cognitive tasks. But her language, it was totally normal, even complex. Then, you've got Williams syndrome, a condition where people often have cognitive impairments, but their language skills are amazing. They're articulate, have huge vocabularies, and just love to use language.
So what in the world does this all mean? Well, it's a pretty big deal. If you can have sophisticated language next to serious cognitive challenges, it pokes a major hole in Piaget's theory. It strongly suggests that maybe thought and language aren't tied at the hip like we assumed. Maybe they're two separate things that can develop on their own tracks. And that idea just completely challenges the whole thought-first model. This evidence forces us to ask a totally different question. We've just seen that thought isn't always a requirement for language. So, what if we flip it? Could the reverse be true? Could learning words actually help build our thoughts? And this leads us to an incredible study of twin boys. When they were 5 years old, both twins were behind in their development because they'd grown up in a really unstimulating place. So, researchers separated them. Twin A got no special training, but Twin B was put into an intensive language program. And the results were, honestly, astonishing. The twin who got language training didn't just get better at talking. He made rapid progress across the board, in all sorts of different cognitive areas. It was like language was a key that unlocked other parts of his brain. This suggests language isn't just a byproduct of thinking. It's a tool that can actively shape and accelerate our thoughts.
So, let's take a step back. Where does all this leave us? We've got Piaget arguing that thought builds language. But we also have these compelling cases showing that language can exist without advanced thought, and can even help build thought. It's time to figure out what's going on.
Okay, so let's recap the journey. We started with the thesis from Piaget, thought is king. Then we looked at the antithesis, the counter-argument from cases like Laura and Williams syndrome, which showed that language can stand on its own. And finally, the twin study gave us a synthesis. Language can turn around and influence thought. It's not just one or the other.
The ultimate takeaway is this. The connection between thought and language isn't a simple one-way street. It's more like a dynamic, interactive feedback loop. Our thoughts give us something to talk about, for sure, but the very language we learn gives us the structure and the tools to form new, more complex thoughts. Each one is constantly building the other.
And that leaves us with one final kind of mind-bending question to think about. If the words we learn aren't just labels for our thoughts, but are actually the scaffolding that helps build our minds, what else can they build? Our realities? Our potential? It's something to chew on, isn't it?
Have you ever just stopped and thought about, well, how you think? You know, that little voice inside your head, the one you use to reason with yourself and make plans. Where did it even come from? Okay, let's get into this, because the psychologist Lev Vygotsky had this incredible theory. Our ability to think is deeply, fundamentally tangled up with our ability to speak.
So to really get this, we got to start with something you've probably seen a million times. You see a little kid, maybe they're stacking blocks or drawing, and they are just chattering away to themselves. It might look kind of random, but Vygotsky believed this is one of the most important things a child can possibly do. It's the key to this whole thing.
All right, so let's rewind all the way back to the very beginning. Section 1, two separate worlds. Vygotsky's whole idea kicks off right at birth. And he said that when we're born, our minds have these two functions that are, believe it or not, completely separate.
So on one hand, you've got thought, but it's not thinking with words like we do. It's totally nonverbal. It's just a world of images and feelings. And on the other hand, you've got language, but it's just sounds, crying, babbling. There's no real thinking behind it. They're like two rivers flowing side by side, but they just don't touch.
But then, something pretty amazing happens. And that brings us to Section 2, the Great Merger. This is that critical moment in a kid's development when those two separate rivers finally start to flow into each other.
Now, this isn't like flipping a switch. It's a journey. You can see it here. At birth, totally separate. But right around age 2, that's when the magic starts. They begin to connect, and they get more and more tangled up until about age 7, when they basically become one and the same.
And that moment around age 2 is just everything. It's like the child has this huge aha moment. They suddenly realize that words aren't just noises. They're symbols for things, for ideas. For the very first time, what they say starts to represent what they think. And even more mind-blowing, they start using words as the building blocks of their thoughts.
Which, of course, brings us right back to that toddler talking to themselves. Section 3, thinking out loud. For Vygotsky, this wasn't just cute kid stuff. This was the mind, building itself, right out in the open where we could see it. Just a totally revolutionary idea. Vygotsky actually had a name for this, egocentric speech. And the most important thing to get about it is that it's not social. The kid isn't trying to talk to you or me, they're talking to themselves. It's their thought process, just spoken out loud.
And here's where you can really see its job. Imagine a kid trying to figure out a tricky puzzle. You'll hear him say things like, okay, this piece, no, not that one. Maybe the blue one fits. Yes, it fits. That chatter isn't just commentary, it's a tool. They are literally using words to steer their own brain, to organize their thoughts. It's self-guidance in action. Now, this was a really radical idea back then. The other giant in this field, Jean Piaget, he saw this self-talk and thought it was a sign of immaturity. Like, the kid just can't see the world from anyone else's perspective yet. But Vygotsky flipped that completely on its head. He said, no, this isn't a weakness, it's a strength. It's a super important step on the way to all complex internal thinking. So, if this out loud thinking is so critical, where does it go?
I mean, we don't see most adults walking around muttering to themselves all day. And that question leads us to Section 4, the birth of inner speech.
The answer is actually pretty simple, but really profound. It doesn't disappear at all. It just gets quiet. That whole external monologue, that tool for guiding yourself, it slowly moves inside. The process of thinking out loud becomes a process of just thinking.
And Vygotsky himself put it perfectly. He said, the relation of thought and word is not a thing, but a process. It's this constant dynamic dance back and forth. Language gives shape to our thoughts, and our thoughts are always reaching for words to express themselves.
And there it is. That's the origin story of your inner voice. That silent monologue you use to weigh options, to solve problems, to think about your day. It's a direct descendant of that little kid chattering away to themselves. It's the fully formed silent tool that started out as loud self-talk.
Okay, so let's tie this all together in our last section. Section 5, Vygotsky's lasting idea. We'll do a quick recap of the theory and touch on why it's still such a big deal today.
So let's just run through the core idea one more time. Thought and language start out separate. Around age 2, they start to merge and rely on each other. That self-talk we see in kids' egocentric speech is really a powerful tool for them to guide themselves. And eventually, that out-loud talk turns inward and becomes our inner speech. So the big takeaway? Language isn't just for talking to other people, it's essential for literally building our own minds.
Now, it is important to mention one little challenge with Vygotsky's work. While his ideas were brilliant and super detailed, he wasn't always so detailed about his methods. And that makes it kind of tough for researchers today to perfectly replicate his studies, which, is a really big part of the scientific process. But the power of his idea is just undeniable. And it leaves us with a really deep question to chew on. If language is the tool we use to construct our minds, if the very words we know actually shape the structure of our thoughts, then think about this. How are the words you choose every single day building your reality?
All right, let's dive in to one of the most fundamental parts of being human. We're going to talk about that incredible and, let's be honest, often mysterious connection between the thoughts swimming around in our heads and the actual words that come out of our mouths. You know that feeling, right? It happens to all of us. You've got this amazing, complex idea. It's crystal clear in your mind, but when you go to actually explain it, the words just aren't there. They fall short. It's super frustrating. But what if I told you that's not a failure? What if it's actually a clue to how your brain works? It turns out that very struggle, that feeling of being lost for words, it's the key to a really revolutionary idea about how our minds are built. It suggests that what you think and what you say might actually be two completely separate things. So here's the core idea for today. Get this, that gap between your brilliant idea and the clunky words you find for it isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's the proof, the evidence that the huge, sprawling world inside your mind, your thoughts, and the tool you use to try and communicate it, language, are two totally distinct things. And the person we have to thank for this groundbreaking concept is the brilliant linguist Noam Chomsky. He really just turned our whole understanding of the mind's architecture on its head. So, according to Chomsky, it kind of works like this. On one side, you've got thought. That's all the messy, complex, beautiful ideas and feelings you can have. And on the other side, you've got language, the specific system of words and rules you use to try and get that inner world out. They're connected, for sure, but they are not the same thing at all. Chomsky argued that every single one of us is born with what he called a language acquisition device, or LAD for short. The best way to think about it is like a specialized piece of mental hardware. It's this biological system in our brains, and it's built for just one job, learning and using language. And the crucial part is it operates separately from our general ability to think. And this just nails the point, doesn't it? This is Chomsky himself describing that exact feeling we started with. He's saying, look, this happens all the time, and it's really hard to make sense of it unless you accept that your thinking happens first, and then you have to go looking for the language to describe it. Okay, so Chomsky gives us this idea that we all have this innate language hardware already installed when we're born. But, hardware is pretty useless until you flip the switch and install the software. So that leads to the next big question. If we're all born with this thing, how do we actually go from a baby making gurgling sounds to a person who can actually speak? Well, it's a journey, and it happens in stages. We're going to walk through the 3 key phases of this whole incredible process. We'll start with early childhood in what's called the chatterbox stage. Then we'll see the rapid growth of the language explosion. And finally, we'll get to the refinement stage of mastering complexity. Let's start right at the beginning in early childhood. This is really where the whole linguistic adventure kicks off. In this first stage, a child's world is pretty much all about them. Their speech is what we call egocentric. It's basically a running commentary on what they want and what they're doing. Their main engine for learning is just pure, unfiltered curiosity, and they pick up words through endless repetition. What's so wild is that even though their language is simple and totally self-focused, you can tell their inner world of wants and observations is already super complex. They talk nonstop because they're basically trying to stick word labels on this vast inner experience they're having. Okay, next up is the phase where things just take off. It's so dramatic, they actually call it the language explosion. The really huge thing that happens here is this major shift in perspective. A child's speech moves from being all about me, or egocentric, to being sociocentric. They start to become way more socially aware, and their communication becomes more balanced, more organized, as they start trying to explain their interests to other people. And during this explosion, their vocabulary just expands at a dizzying speed. Suddenly, they're grabbing onto concepts of numbers, time, even slang they pick up. Their sentences get way more complex, and their cognitive abilities are really firing on all cylinders. This is where the horizon of their language just opens up to its absolute maximum potential. And that brings us to the final stage of this journey, during the adolescent years, where all of those foundational skills get sharpened into these incredibly powerful and sophisticated tools. The leap here is just massive. Now we're talking about being able to use complex sentences not just in speech but in writing. They can craft stories, they really understand grammar, and they can make inferences. They start using figurative language like metaphors and similes, and, this is huge, they can think about abstract situations and hypotheticals. The language toolbox is finally sophisticated enough to start doing justice to just how complex their thoughts have become. So let's bring this all the way back to where we started. To that feeling, that frustration of having a thought that feels bigger than any words you can find for it. And this is really the main takeaway. That frustration you feel isn't a limitation of your mind. Actually, it's a reflection of just how vast your mind is. Your ability to think will almost always be bigger, wider, and more complex than your current vocabulary. Language is the amazing tool we use to explore that inner world, but your mind is the true limitless horizon. So, the next time you're searching for just the right word and can't find it, remember this: your thought isn't the word you're missing, it's something else entirely. And that leaves us with one last, pretty fascinating question to chew on. If your thought isn't language, then what is it? Have you ever really, truly stopped to think about one of the most incredible things you've ever done in your entire life? You learned a language. From absolute scratch. No lessons, no textbooks, nothing. Well, today, we're going to rewind the tape on that journey we all took and explore the absolutely miraculous first year of language. So that's the big mystery, right? How on earth does a tiny human with zero formal training manage to crack the code of language? We're talking about one of the most complex, intricate systems humanity has ever come up with. And yet, they do it. The answer is just as fascinating as the question itself. It's been called an amazingly complex skill, but here's the thing. Almost every single child picks it up, and they make it look easy. This isn't just some happy accident. Nope. It's a fundamental part of our human blueprint, and it unfolds in a series of predictable, totally universal stages. We're going to zoom in on that foundational first year, what we call the pre-linguistic stage. This is the period before the first word. It might seem quiet from the outside, but trust me, it's an incredibly busy time where all the essential groundwork gets laid. Okay, so let's just map out this incredible journey really quick. We start right at birth with crying as a form of communication. Then, around 2 months, we get those sweet cooing sounds. At 6 months, the big breakthrough, babbling. By 9 months, gestures enter the picture, and then at 10 months and beyond, something amazing happens. That babbling starts to sound like the language spoken at home. It's a whirlwind of a first year. So let's rewind all the way back to day 1. Because long before mama or dada are even a remote possibility, a baby is already having conversations. Their first dialogues are all about sound, using the only instrument they have the moment they arrive in the world. That's right, crying. To an outsider, it might just sound like noise, but it is a baby's first language. And parents, well, they become fluent and fast. They learn to tell the difference between the I'm hungry cry, the I'm tired cry, and the I need a diaper change cry. It's a genuine conversation, a real back and forth of needs and responses. Then, around the 2-month mark, a brand new sound shows up, cooing. This is the baby's first attempt at making pure vowel sounds, those little oohs and ahs that just melt your heart. It's a huge leap because it represents their first real intentional control over their voice to say, hey, I'm happy. So, once they get the hang of vowels, the next great linguistic adventure kicks off around 6 months. This is when babies start playing with a whole new category of sounds, and we get to hear the first absolutely delightful emergence of babbling. Now, the real game changer here is the introduction of consonants. This is when you start hearing those classic ba-ba-ba and ga-ga-ga sounds. The baby is now literally building the basic blocks of words, syllables. It's a monumental step on the road to actual speech. And this is where it gets really, really cool. Babbling is universal. A baby in Japan and a baby in Brazil will start babbling at roughly the same time, making the same initial sounds. And get this, even infants who are deaf will babble with their hands. It's just powerful, undeniable evidence that this is a hardwired biological impulse, not just them copying sounds they hear. Okay, but if babbling starts out as this universal thing, how does a baby end up speaking English or Spanish or Mandarin? Well, the answer is in this fascinating process where their brain starts to tune itself, sculpting itself to the specific sounds of its own little world. Right around 10 months old, the environment really starts to take over. The baby's brain becomes this super sophisticated filter. It starts to ignore sounds that aren't part of its native language and focuses in on the ones that are. They're essentially becoming specialists in the sounds of their own culture. And this all leads to something called echolalia. You've definitely heard this before. It's when a baby strings together these long chains of babble, like da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But if you listen really closely, you can hear the music of their language, the rising and falling tones that sound just like a real conversation. It's like a full dress rehearsal for speech. So far, we've mostly been talking about the sounds a baby can make. But what about the quiet, unseen world inside their mind? Well, as it turns out, there is a whole universe of understanding that blossoms long before they can say their first actual words. So to really get this, we have to know the difference between two kinds of language. There's receptive language, which is all about understanding, and then there's expressive language, which is about speaking. And in a baby's world, one of these is speeding down the highway, while the other is kind of still learning how to start the car. And here is the absolute key insight. A baby's ability to understand language runs laps around their ability to produce it. They might totally understand what bottle means or who doggy is, months, even a whole year before they can actually say those words. Their brain is just way ahead of their mouth. And that is a universal truth for every one of us. And this huge cognitive leap isn't just happening with spoken words. Around 9 months, babies become masters of nonverbal communication. You know when they point at a toy and then make a little grasping motion with their hand? That is not just a cute gesture. It's a complex, intentional request. It's a whole sentence just spoken with their hands. So, this entire first year, this pre-linguistic stage, is really the unsung hero of language. It's this period of intense learning where a baby's tuning their vocal cords, decoding the soundtrack of their world, and learning the art of communication, all in preparation for that one magical moment when they finally break their silence with a word. And that kind of brings us to a final, just awe-inspiring thought. If a baby can accomplish all of this without a single lesson, just by being here and paying attention, what does that say about the incredible power of the human mind? The next time you see a baby, just remember, you're not only looking at a cute face, you are witnessing a quiet, beautiful miracle of learning happening right there in real time. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most incredible journeys we all go on, but none of us can actually remember, learning our very first words. It's this amazing process, full of these really surprising twists and turns that starts with just a single sound and ends with a true explosion of language. You know, have you ever been around a toddler who just points at something and says one word, like juice or doggy? Seems simple, right? But what if that single word is actually a question, or a command, or an entire statement all rolled into one? Well, it turns out there's way more going on than you might think. So where does this all begin? Let's go right to the starting line. That magical, long-awaited moment a child says their very first intentional word. For most kids, it happens right around their first birthday, at about 12 months old. This is when they make that huge leap from just babbling to using their first real words. Linguists actually call this the one-word stage. Now, these first words, they're rarely perfect. A kid might say ba for bottle or wawa for water. They're not exact copies of what we say, but, and this is the key thing, they are consistent. The child uses that same sound for the same object every single time. That's what makes it intentional communication. So you might think once that first word is out, the floodgates just burst open, right? Words just start pouring out. But the reality is surprisingly different. The process actually kicks off with a very, very slow start. That's right. After all the excitement of hearing that first mama or dada, progress can feel like it hits a brick wall. A child might learn that one word and then nothing new for a little while. And yeah, that can surprise a lot of new parents. Just how slow are we talking? Well, research shows that after that first word finally pops out, it can take another 3, even 4 months just to add about 10 more words to their vocabulary. It's this steady, one-at-a-time grind, but something big is waiting just around the corner. And here it is. This is the moment we've been building up to. After months of that slow, methodical progress, suddenly, everything changes. Welcome to the vocabulary explosion. So, what exactly is the vocabulary explosion? Well, it's this period, usually kicking in between 16 and 18 months, when a child's brain just seems to flick a switch and go into high gear for language. They start soaking up new words at an incredible rate. And it's no coincidence. This happens right around the time they're hitting other big milestones, like starting to string 2 words together. To really get the scale of this, let's look at the numbers. At about 18 months, right at the start of this explosion, a typical kid has a vocabulary of around 50 words. That's the foundation they've been slowly, carefully building. Okay, now get ready for this. Just 6 months later, by the time they turn 2, that number skyrockets to around 300 words. Think about that. That's a 6-fold increase in just half a year. It's an absolutely incredible feat of learning. I mean, when you see it laid out like this, the difference is just staggering. That leap from 50 to 300 words isn't just gradual growth, it really is an explosion. The speed of learning in that short little window is just phenomenal. Okay, so we know they're learning a lot of words fast. But what kind of words are they? Let's take a closer look at that initial foundation, those first 50 words that really get them started. What's so fascinating is how consistent kids are all over the world. A massive 51%, over half, of their early words are what linguists call general nominals. Basically, they're just the names for common objects in their world. Let's break down what these different types actually mean. So let's look at these categories. General nominals. That's the biggest group. That's words for things they can see and touch. Bottle, ball, car. Then you have specific nominals, which are unique names for people or maybe the family pet, like Mina or Dada. And action words, well, they describe what's happening, like look, go, or up. It's all very practical, very here and now. All right, now for what I think is the most mind-bending part of this whole thing. Even with just a few dozen words in their toolkit, children can communicate these incredibly complex ideas. How on earth do they do it? Simple. They make one single word do the work of an entire sentence. The technical term for this is a hollow phrase. It's using one word to get a whole thought across. The meaning changes completely based on the situation, the child's tone of voice, and the gestures they're using. It's a brilliant, incredibly efficient little communication system. Let's use a real example from the research so you can see this in action. A child in one study consistently used the sound D to talk about their favorite doll. That was just their word for it. So watch how this one little sound becomes a whole message. The child says D, that's the word, but they say it with a rising tone, almost like a question. And at the same time, they point across the room right at the doll. You put it all together, the word, the tone, the gesture, and the real message is suddenly crystal clear. I want the doll. It's a complete request, all packed into a single syllable. And there you have it. From a surprisingly slow start to a sudden explosion of words, and this amazing ability to pack entire sentences into a single sound. So the next time you hear a toddler say just one word, listen a little closer. What are they really trying to tell you? It just makes you wonder, what other hidden complexities are lying in our earliest attempts to connect with the world around us? Thanks for joining us.
All right, today we're jumping into one of the most amazing transformations in human development, how a toddler's brain actually cracks the code of grammar. Let's dive in.
Have you ever really thought about it? How does a kid go from just babbling and goo goo gaga to forming actual complex sentences? Well, it might seem like magic, but there's a predictable, structured, and frankly, genius process going on behind the scenes.
So, our journey starts with something we can call the two-word revolution. This is that incredible moment where the very first sparks of grammar really begin to fly.
Things really get going around 18 months, but the acceleration from that point on is just wow. We're talking about going from simple two-word phrases to a vocabulary of thousands in just a couple of years.
You know, it's so much more than just sticking two words together. When a toddler puts together their first two-word sentence, they're taking this huge leap into the world of syntax, the rules for how we combine words to actually make sense. This becomes the bedrock for everything else that follows.
So what do these first sentences really sound like? Well, researchers have this brilliant analogy for it. They call it speaking in telegrams.
Telegraphic speech. Just picture one of those old-school telegrams, right? Where every single word cost you money. You'd be super careful to only use the most important words to get your message across. Well, toddlers, they do the exact same thing.
And this is a perfect example. A kid says, play doll. You know exactly what they mean, right? But all those little connecting words, the I am with the, they're just gone. It's pure, efficient communication.
So this whole telegraph stage has its own kind of grammar. The sentences are super short, usually just 2 or 3 words. They only use the real heavy hitters, nouns, verbs, the important stuff. And all the grammatical fluff, like adding an S for plurals or using the word am, it all just gets dropped. Okay, so while they're getting the hang of these simple sentences, something else is happening at the same time. And honestly, it is absolutely mind-blowing. Welcome to what's known as the vocabulary explosion. So get this, at 2 years old, right in the middle of all this, a toddler has around 300 words. And that's pretty cool by itself, right? But it's just the starting line. Because you fast forward just 4 years to when they're 6, and that number has exploded to an average of, wait for it, 13,000 words. I mean, just think about that rate of learning. It's just incredible. And when you see it laid out like this, the growth is just staggering. It's not a slow, steady climb. Nope, it is an exponential leap. It really drives home the sheer scale and speed of what's happening inside that little brain.
Okay, so this massive explosion in words brings up the biggest question of all, doesn't it? It's not just about learning thousands of words, it's about knowing what to do with them. How in the world do they pull off this amazing feat of language construction?
The easy answer is to think they're just little parrots, right? Just mimicking the sentences they hear from adults. But if that was all it was, they'd only be able to repeat stuff they've already heard. The research tells us there's something way deeper going on.
And that brings us to the absolute heart of it all. The research is really clear on this one. There is no dispute about the assertion that even at this earliest stage, children create sentences following rules. They aren't just copying, they are creating.
So what does that mean? It means that toddlers have some kind of internal blueprint for language. It's like they intuitively get the rules for how to put words in the right order, which lets them build brand new sentences they have never, ever heard before.
Which leaves us with this one final, really fascinating question to chew on. When we watch a child learn to speak, are we watching them learn a skill from scratch, like riding a bike? Or are we watching them unlock a powerful, innate ability that was coded into their brain from the very beginning? It's really something to think about, isn't it? Thanks for joining me.
Have you ever just stopped and listened to a toddler talk? I mean, really listened. They go from basically just making noises to telling you a whole story in what feels like the blink of an eye. It's like magic, right? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain and try to decode the incredible secret language of toddlers.
So this is the big one. This is the central mystery. How on earth does a tiny human brain, with 0 lessons and no textbooks, build a whole language from the ground up? We're talking grammar, vocabulary, social cues, the whole shebang. Let's break it down clue by clue and see if we can solve it.
Okay, first stop on our investigation is just the sheer speed of it all. It's not a slow, gradual process. There's this very specific, very short window in a kid's life where language development just goes into hyperdrive. It's a period of absolutely explosive growth.
And the magic number seems to be right around here, 30 months, or 2.5 years old. At this age, it's like a switch just flips in their brain. Something absolutely incredible starts to happen. It's the beginning of what scientists call the grammar explosion.
All of a sudden, simple phrases like more juice or doggy go just don't cut it anymore. Sentences start stretching out. You'll hear new words and little grammatical bits popping up almost every single day. It is a literal revolution happening right there in the high chair as that little mind starts building the entire structure of a language.
So let's look at our next clue, because this is where it gets really, really interesting. This grammar explosion isn't random. It's not just them memorizing more words and throwing them together. Nope. They are like little detectives, uncovering a secret set of rules, the hidden grammar that we all use. And the crazy part is, they learn these rules in a surprisingly predictable order.
And what's so wild is how consistent this is. For kids learning English, the pattern is almost always the same. First, they nail that ing ending for things that are happening right now, like playing. Then they figure out those small but super important words, and the. And then, a little later, they master adding an S to make plurals. It's like they're leveling up their grammar skills one achievement at a time.
So this leads to the big question, right? You might be thinking, okay, but are they just being clever little parrots, just repeating phrases they've heard 1,000 times? Well, the evidence says it's way cooler than that.
And this is the smoking gun. Think about it for a second. When was the last time you heard a grown-up say, "I'm not playing"? Probably never. We'd say, "I am not playing." So where did the toddler get that from? They made it up. They figured out a rule. If you want to make something negative, you put not in front of the verb. They are actively building a sentence with their own internal grammar. They're builders, not just parrots.
Okay, so they're becoming grammar wizards. That's one half of the puzzle solved. But what about the other half? How do they figure out what all these words actually mean? When you point to a dog and say, "Dog," how does that little brain know you mean the whole animal and not just its floppy ears or its bark or the concept of furry? Well, it turns out their brain comes with a few built-in cheat codes.
So yeah, how do they do it? Their minds seem to come preloaded with 3 basic assumptions for mapping words onto the world around them. You can think of it like their starter pack for learning vocabulary. Let's walk through them.
First up is the referential principle, and this is pretty straightforward. It's the basic idea that words are labels for categories of things. So when a toddler hears dog, their brain just automatically assumes that word is the label for the furry animal itself, not the leash it's on or the ball it's chasing. It's like putting a label on a specific box. Next, we have the extendability principle. This is what lets them take a word and run with it. The word dog isn't just for Fido, the family pet. It's also for the poodle next door, the beagle at the park, even the cartoon dog on TV. They just get that the label applies to all members of that group.
And finally, there's the whole object principle. This one's a game changer. Remember we asked how they know dog doesn't just mean its tail? This is how. Their brain's default setting is that a new word refers to the entire object. This is a massive shortcut that saves them from a ton of confusion.
Okay, let's do a quick recap. They're mastering grammar? Check. They're cracking the code of what words mean? Check. But there's one final, crucial piece of the puzzle. Learning how to actually use all this stuff to talk to other people. This is the art of conversation.
And before we get into that, here is a fact that just blows my mind every time. By the time a kid is 5 years old, 5, they have already learned and mastered most of the complex grammar they are going to use for their entire life. The heavy lifting is pretty much done. It's just incredible.
And it's not just that they're speaking correctly, they're becoming little social experts. Look at this. A 5-year-old intuitively knows to change how they speak depending on who they're talking to. With a grown-up, they'll bust out their big words and complex sentences. But when they talk to their baby brother or sister, they automatically simplify everything. That's a really sophisticated skill.
And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? Learning a language isn't just about memorizing a dictionary. It's about mastering a social tool. It's about knowing the rules, sure, but it's also about knowing how to use those rules to actually connect with another human being. Which leaves us with one final, fascinating thought to chew on. This entire unbelievably complex system is built almost entirely without any conscious effort. It's a cognitive miracle happening under the surface. And it just makes you wonder, if a child's brain can pull off this incredible feat of building a language from scratch, what other hidden powers are just waiting in there to be unlocked?
Have you ever just stopped and watched a little kid learn to talk? I mean, really watch them. They go from making little gurgling sounds to forming actual, complex sentences in what feels like the blink of an eye. It's kind of magical. Today, we're going to try and unpack that magic. We're diving into the incredible puzzle of how a child's brain masters language. And I mean, think about that for a second. We have supercomputers, right? We have artificial intelligence that we pour billions of dollars into just trying to get it to understand and use language like a human. And yet, a 3-year-old just does it, almost without trying. So how? How is that even possible? That's the big question we're digging into today. And look, this isn't just us wondering. Even the experts are still scratching their heads over it. This quote really hits the nail on the head. Kids do this without any formal lessons. Their brains are still under construction, and yet they just get it. So let's play detective and look at the main clues the experts have come up with. Okay, our first major clue in this mystery is what I like to call the sponge brain. This idea suggests that the real key to the puzzle isn't something hidden inside the child's mind, but actually it's everything that's happening around them. This is the classic nurture side of the argument. You've probably heard this one before. The idea is that a baby's brain is basically a super absorbent sponge, just soaking up every word, every sound, every conversation it hears. It's not about being pre-programmed, it's all about learning from the environment. So here's how it works in practice. Picture it. A child hears the word milk. They try to copy it, maybe it comes out as Mick. And what happens? They get feedback, maybe a smile, a good job, and, most importantly, they get the milk. That whole loop, hear, try, get rewarded, gets repeated thousands and thousands of times, slowly shaping those clumsy sounds into words, and then those words into full-on sentences. But wait a minute, that can't be the whole story, can it? I mean, think about it. Kids say all kinds of things they've definitely never heard an adult say. Like, I gooed to the store, or I have 2 foots. So where does that come from? Well, that brings us to our second clue. The idea that maybe, just maybe, kids are born with a head start. This one flips the script. This is the nature side of the debate. The nativist theory says we don't just learn language from scratch. Instead, we're born with a kind of universal grammar already hardwired into our brains. The basic rules, like what a noun is, what a verb is, are part of our human biology from day one. And this is a great way to think about it. Imagine there's this little language machine that comes pre-installed in every baby's brain. Now, it's not preloaded with English or Japanese or Spanish, but it knows the rules. It knows what to do with verbs and nouns. So as soon as it starts hearing words, the machine just switches on and starts sorting them into the right grammatical buckets. It's pretty cool, right? Okay, so we've got the sponge soaking up the environment, and we've got the secret biological blueprint. But what's the trigger? What actually kicks this whole incredible process into high gear? Well, our third and final clue suggests the real driver isn't just about listening or instinct, it's about connection. It turns out learning a language is a team sport. Now, this theory is just a fantastic bridge between the first two. It basically says, yeah, nature and nurture are both important, but you're missing the why. And the why is that children learn to talk because they have this deep, fundamental desire to connect with the people around them. It's not just about absorbing words, it's about using those words to be part of their world. And that's the crucial idea here. Language is a tool. It's a tool for getting a toy, for sharing how you feel, for joining in on a game. That powerful need to interact, that's the classroom. So this theory doesn't throw out the other two. It says the sponge brain and the grammar blueprint are both ignited by that social spark, that burning need to communicate. All right, we've laid out all the evidence. We've got the sponge-like brain, the secret blueprint, and that powerful social spark. So which one is it? Which theory finally solves the great language puzzle? When you see it all laid out like this, side by side, it's really clear. You've got nurture, which is all about learning from your environment. You've got nature, which says you're born with the rules. And you've got connection, which says it's all driven by the need to interact. Looking at them, you start to wonder, do we really have to choose just one? And that right there is the big reveal. The final verdict isn't to crown one theory as the winner. The real answer seems to be that it's a mix, a complex, beautiful dance between all three. A child is born with the capacity for language, that's nature. That capacity is then shaped and filled in by everything they hear and experience. That's nurture. And the whole thing is powered by their deep human drive to connect with others. So let me leave you with this final thought. This whole thing is way more than just some academic debate. If we could really fully crack this code, if we truly understood how this process works, what would that mean? Could we completely revolutionize how we teach kids? Could we create incredible new therapies for people with speech disorders? Could we finally build an AI that doesn't just mimic language, but actually understands it? The answers to some of the biggest questions of our future might just be hiding in a high chair, babbling away.
All right, let's dive right into one of the biggest, most fascinating debates in all of psychology. How in the world do we learn to talk? This is a true clash of the titans. In one corner, you've got the psychologist B.F. Skinner, and in the other, the linguist Noam Chomsky. So let's get into it.
I mean, have you ever really stopped to think about how wild that is? A baby goes from just making noises to asking for juice to telling you a whole story about their day. How does that happen? How does meaningless babble transform into complex conversation? That's the huge mystery we're tackling today.
So first up, let's talk about the behaviorist side of things, championed by the incredibly influential B.F. Skinner. For Skinner, language wasn't some magical built-in ability. Nope. He thought it was just like any other behavior we have, something we learn step by step from the world around us.
Okay, so Skinner's entire argument really hangs on this one super powerful idea, reinforcement. And the concept is actually pretty simple. If you do something, and something good happens right after, you're way more likely to do that thing again. You know, the classic example is a rat in a box. It bumps a lever by accident, and a food pellet drops. Well, you can bet it's going to start pushing that lever a lot more. The food reinforces the behavior.
Skinner took that exact same logic and applied it to how we learn to talk. Think about it. For a baby, what's the ultimate reward? Attention from a parent. So when a baby kind of accidentally babbles something that sounds a little bit like mama, and the parents get all excited and shower them with praise, that's the reinforcement. The baby learns, hey, when I make that sound, good things happen.
And this whole thing, it doesn't just stop at simple sounds. Skinner called this next part behavior shaping. It's all about gradually molding simple actions into something way more complex. It starts with imitation. Picture this. A parent points at a duck and says, duck. The child tries to say duck. Maybe it comes out as duh. But that's close enough. The parent praises them. Through thousands and thousands of these little interactions, that simple babbling gets slowly shaped into real, fluent language.
So Skinner's theory, it was neat, it was tidy, and it made a lot of sense. For a while there, it was the way to think about it. But, yeah, not everyone was buying it. Not by a long shot. A huge challenge was just around the corner, ready to turn this whole conversation on its head.
And this is where our other heavyweight, the linguist Noam Chomsky, steps into the ring. He read Skinner's work and basically wrote this legendary takedown, arguing that this whole behaviorist view, it just couldn't explain how kids actually learn to speak in the real world.
Okay, so Chomsky's first big problem with Skinner's theory was all about speed. If Skinner was right, learning to talk should be this really slow, painful process of trial and error, right? But that's just not what happens. Kids are like little language sponges. They pick up words and grammar at a mind-blowing pace, and it doesn't seem like parents are sitting there giving them careful lessons every single day. And he didn't stop there. Chomsky had a bunch of other really strong points. For one, he said, think about it. Parents don't really act like grammar coaches. They're usually more focused on whether you can understand what the kid is saying, not if they use the past tense correctly. Then there's the fact that no matter where you are in the world, in any culture, kids learn language in a surprisingly similar way. And maybe the real kicker, kids are constantly saying things they have never heard an adult say. They're making up new sentences all the time.
So you might be thinking, why does this old debate even matter? Well, it matters a ton, because we're not just talking about some little academic disagreement here. This gets right to the core of what it means to be human. Is language, our most defining skill, just something we learn like riding a bike? Or is it something much, much deeper, something woven into our biology?
Chomsky put it perfectly when he said this. He believed that the creativity of language, our ability to produce and understand an infinite number of new sentences, is its most important feature.
For Chomsky, there's just no way that a simple reward system of reinforcement and imitation could explain that kind of incredible, creative power. It had to mean there's something else going on, maybe like an innate grammar book already inside our brains. And that really leaves us with the million-dollar question that researchers are still trying to fully answer today. Was Skinner right? Is language a skill we build piece by piece from the outside world? Or was Chomsky onto something? Is it more like an instinct, an ability that just blossoms from within us? The real answer is probably a mix of both, but man, this debate completely changed the game and forever shaped how we think about our own minds.
Have you ever just watched a little kid and wondered, how on earth do they learn to talk? I mean, they can barely use a spoon, but somehow they master the insanely complex rules of grammar. It's a puzzle that was a real head-scratcher for scientists for a long, long time. Today, we're going to unpack how one thinker, Noam Chomsky, came up with a totally revolutionary answer. I mean, really think about it. We don't give toddlers grammar lessons, right? There are no workbooks, no red pens. They just listen. They hear bits and pieces of conversations, sentences that aren't even finished, and yet, somehow, they crack the code. And they don't just copy what they hear. They start making up their own sentences, things they've never ever heard before. So how is that even possible?
Well, back in the middle of the 20th century, a linguist named Noam Chomsky took a look at this mystery and proposed something pretty radical. He said, maybe we're looking at this whole thing backwards. What if language isn't something we learn from the outside in? What if it's something that just grows from the inside out?
And that was his core idea right there. He believed we're literally born with the ability for language hardwired into our DNA. It's not just a skill we pick up like riding a bike, it's a biological instinct, almost like a spider knowing how to spin a web. It's just part of being human.
So this idea actually has a name. It's called the nativist theory. Nativists believe that our minds are not blank slates when we're born. Nope. Instead, we come into the world with certain abilities, certain frameworks already built in. And for Chomsky, language was the ultimate example of one of these pre-installed skills.
Okay, so if language is innate, what does that actually mean? Is there a language part of the brain? Well, Chomsky proposed a hypothetical tool, a kind of mental engine for grammar that every single one of us has. And he gave it a name, the Language Acquisition Device, or LAD for short.
You can think of the LAD as being like a pre-installed operating system, but for language. It doesn't come loaded with English or Spanish or Swahili. Instead, it comes loaded with the universal rules that all human languages follow. So when a baby starts hearing speech, the LAD just kicks into gear, starts analyzing the patterns, and helps the child build their language from the ground up.
This idea of the LAD also gives us a pretty good explanation for why this ability seems to be a uniquely human trick. Chomsky argued that you can spend years trying to teach an animal to talk, but it'll never be able to use language with the creativity and complexity of a 3-year-old child. And why? Because it's missing that fundamental piece of biological hardware. It doesn't have an LAD.
Now, you might be wondering, how can one single device possibly work for every language on the planet? Well, Chomsky's answer was that deep down, all languages are basically cut from the same cloth. They all have fundamental building blocks like nouns and verbs, ways to ask questions, and so on. The LAD is tuned into this shared blueprint, what Chomsky called linguistic universals, and that's what allows it to work its magic on whatever language it hears.
All right, so we've got this grammar engine in our heads, but how does it actually handle the sentences we say and hear every single day? To get that, we need to understand a really key distinction that Chomsky made.
So, Chomsky said that every sentence we use operates on 2 different levels. First, there's the surface structure. That's the literal string of words you actually speak or hear. But underneath that, there's the deep structure. And that's the core meaning, the actual idea you're trying to get across. This difference is absolutely critical.
Here's a perfect example. I ate fruits versus fruits were eaten by me. Now, on the surface, those are totally different sentences, right? The word order's all shuffled around, different words are used. But what about the meaning, the deep structure? It's exactly the same. The same person did the same action to the same things.
And this amazing ability our brains have to flip between meaning and words. That's what Chomsky called transformational grammar. When you decide to say something, your brain starts with the meaning, the deep structure, and it performs a lightning-fast transformation to turn it into words. And when you're listening, it does the exact same thing, but in reverse. It's a constant, effortless process happening in your head right now. So let's pull back for a second. What's the big takeaway here?
Chomsky's theory wasn't just some abstract idea for linguists. It completely changed the way we understand the human mind and what it means to be human. The impact was just huge. It suggested that learning a language isn't something you're just taught. It's something that matures inside you on a biological timetable, just like learning to walk. This flew in the face of the popular idea that our minds are just blank slates. Instead, it paints a picture of a mind that comes pre-equipped for greatness. This idea helped kick off what's known as the cognitive revolution in psychology, and it even pushed forward fields like AI, because it showed us just how incredibly sophisticated our own internal programming really is.
And ultimately, Chomsky's work leaves us with a pretty profound question to chew on. If a system as elegant and complex as grammar is literally part of our biological inheritance, a gift from our species, well, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other incredible structures might be hiding in our DNA, just waiting to be discovered?
Have you ever just stopped and listened to a toddler starting to form their very first words? It's honestly kind of magical, right? It feels like we're witnessing a small miracle, something that just happens. But how does it happen? That's one of the biggest questions in human development. And the answer, well, it might not just be in our biology, but in the connections we have with each other. So, this is the fundamental question we're tackling. Is language like pre-installed software in our brains, something we're just born with? Or is it something that can only be built through connection and, well, talking to each other? This is one of the great debates in understanding what makes us, human. And that debate, like in so many parts of psychology, really boils down to nature versus nurture. On one side, you've got the idea that language is just innate, it's in our DNA. And on the other, the idea that it's all learned. So let's break down these two competing schools of thought. Okay, so on the left, we've got the nativist view. This theory basically says we're all born with a special built-in capacity for language. It's really focused on the rules, the grammar, the whole structure of it all. But then on the right, you have this other idea, the social interactionist view. This one argues that language isn't pre-programmed. It's learned through active engagement. It focuses less on grammar rules and way more on pragmatics, which is just a fancy way of saying the practical, real-world use of language to get things done. And that's the theory we're going to unpack today. So yeah, let's dive into this nurture challenger. The social interactionist theory offers this really powerful alternative. It suggests that the real key to language isn't found inside the brain alone, but in that space between people. So here's the main idea in a nutshell. It's not enough for a child to just hear language. See, simply being exposed to words, like having the TV on in the background, that's not the magic ingredient. The crucial element, the thing that makes it all work, is being an active participant in a social exchange. Okay, so if active interaction is the engine, how does it actually work? Let's take a look at a couple of key concepts from the thinkers who really shaped this theory. First up is the psychologist Vygotsky. He called language learning a co-constructed process. The best way to think about it is like a master builder and an apprentice working on a house together. The expert guides the novice, and through that shared work, the apprentice learns the craft. In this case, the craft is language, and the work is conversation. The meaning is built together. Building right on top of that idea is the work of Jerome Bruner. He came up with this concept he called the Language Acquisition Socialization System, or LAS for short. It's a brilliant way to picture it. Our entire social world, our family, our culture, our daily routines, all of it acts as a support system, like a kind of scaffolding that helps a child build their language skills piece by piece. Now, if there is one golden rule to this entire theory, this is it. For any of this to work, for the magic to happen, the interaction has to be a two-way street. It's got to be a give and take, a back and forth. Just passively listening, it doesn't cut it. So what does this effective two-way street look like in real life? Well, it's a parent asking their kid about their day and actually truly listening to the answer. It's kids arguing over the rules of a game. It's a teacher guiding a student through a new idea. Really, it's any situation where a child is actively engaged in that give and take. That's where the learning happens. And on the flip side, the theory argues that one-way communication is a pretty poor teacher. Think about a child watching television or just listening to the radio. They're just a passive receiver. There's no back and forth, no co-construction. It's exposure to words, sure, but it's not active learning. But, like any big theory, this one isn't without its questions. To really get the full picture, we've got to evaluate both its strengths and, its limitations. The strengths are pretty compelling. For one, it correctly frames language learning as an ongoing process, not some finished product you're just born with. It also puts language in its proper home, our social and cultural lives. I mean, that just makes sense, right? And it recognizes that the way we learn to speak in one community might be totally different from another. But there are some limitations to think about. For one, interaction styles are really different across cultures. In some cultures, adults talk to children constantly, while in others, they mostly talk around them. And yet, kids in all of these cultures learn to talk. So that's a bit of a puzzle. Also, critics point out that the theory is way better at describing the what than the how. We still need more research on the exact brain mechanisms that turn all these social cues into actual grammar. So, after weighing all the arguments, what's the big takeaway? Why does this whole nature versus nurture debate really matter for understanding ourselves? Ultimately, I think the theory's core insight is captured perfectly right here. Language has a social embedded nature and can be understood in that context only. In other words, you just can't separate our words from our world. They're woven together. So here it is, the bottom line. Regardless of what we're born with, this theory makes one thing crystal clear. Active two-way engagement is the engine of language development. It's the conversation, the connection, and the shared experiences that turn a child's potential into actual, real-life proficiency. And that leaves us with a really critical question for our time. If rich, back-and-forth conversation is the essential ingredient for learning to talk, what does that mean for a world where so many of our interactions happen through screens? It's something worth thinking about the next time we talk. Or, text.